Without further ado, I think some of the things that we wanted to kind of discuss about, the current events and tap into some of the knowledge that we have as a privilege with Jared Stein with us today. So just to give you a quick background of Jared, he is our VP of Higher Education for Strategy for Instructure. He's engaged with academic leaders and teachers, technologists, and students around the world to really help not only inform the future development of a Canvas product, but he's a really thought leader in the education sector across the globe, and really a person that people look to for some good standard-based guides and blended learning and how we go about executing that as we think about our technology transformation. So just want to have a little bit of a chat with Jared today, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself later. Don't worry about me. I think the most important thing is for us to have a good understanding and get some time with Jared today. So thank you, Jared, for joining us. One of the things that we kind of want to talk about is, what is education's response and risks as we go into this kind of change of the world as we see it, which I think was always coming, and in some places is ahead of the curve. But in this particular moment, where we think about the current crises across for the education sector, campus closures. So I think what we see now is our moving away from this crisis, back into campuses, back to getting into the building. Just what are your thoughts, Jared, on how that impact of the transformation and how we're going to carry this with us from this point in time moving forward?
Yeah, I think this is a really fascinating part of history to be living through for educators and for technologists and for students and instructors as well. One of the things that we saw, of course, was a very rapid response by many, many institutions, the vast majority of institutions, to the COVID-19 virus by closing campuses down and switching, by and large, switching courses and modules to online or to remote teaching situations. And I think, number one, all of the educators and support staff and students themselves who have participated in this rapid change should be commended and applauded because they did it fast. They did it oftentimes without sufficient warning or support that they might need in a normal situation. And what we see as we talk with institutions, an attitude that, yeah, we can do this and we can get through. Now, I think as the terms begin to come to an end and we start thinking about, whether it's a summer term or a fall term coming up, institutions are now asking themselves, what is next? And I think this is a question that all of us in higher education need to be considering, not just for ourselves, but for education as a whole. So what does come next? A lot of institutions in the US are already planning for a fall term or a fall start that will not be physically on campus with classrooms that are brick and mortar and with regular meeting times. They're planning for continued remote teaching or online courses for those modules and programs. So that's what the current plan is amongst many institutions, but I think there is still a fair number of institutions who are thinking that this thing might blow over during the summer and that a normal, quote unquote, normal fall start is a possibility where students are meeting with teachers in their physical classrooms once again. I think it's too soon for us to say with any kind of definitive answer what is going to happen, but I think we can, and it's useful to think about the possible directions that our institutions might move in based upon what happens this fall. So on the one hand, let's say that the COVID virus pretty much takes care of itself during the summer, and that most higher ed institutions are able to reopen their campuses in the fall. Well, then there's the question of whether or not we look back on these campus closures as primarily a blip in history. It's in the rear view and everything's quote unquote back to normal, or if there are things that we learn from this and we adapt the way that we train our teaching staff and our students for the short term and the long term. I think there's also the reality that many institutions are saying to themselves, you know, this really took us by surprise and we didn't have sufficient plans for a crisis that might result in a closure of campus. So that itself, just having that continuity plan, making sure that that's thorough and that all staff are able to adapt at a moment, that is the key. So even if, you know, we see campuses reopen in the fall, the best case will be that institutions will have their continuity plans and they will begin a new professional development and training effort for their teaching staff that enables them to be better prepared to adapt in the case that they must shift to remote teaching. I don't know that this is going to signal a major shift toward fully online education, but it might in fact inspire some educators and some programs to think about augmenting their existing offerings with more online courses, or at the very least, to begin a very active and deliberate shift toward blended learning. Now, I think the answer is different if you look past a fall start where, you know, where the virus has continued to keep campuses closed. Then you're going to see staff and educators really scramble to improve their course design so that it's better supportive of the online modes. And that's, you know, that's got a lot of ramifications associated with it that we can talk about as well.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think about, you know, because I come from a long family of educators. I have 2 aunts and an uncle that were in the education system for over 30 years. My sister is the director of an entire division of K-12 education in Central Florida in America. And I have another sister that does teaching in special education for autistic and Down syndrome children. So, and also for me, just personally for me, my career path has always been driven by diversity and inclusion, and in ways in which you can reach beyond what the normal looks like and be able to connect with those where there's potential that we haven't tapped into. So when I think about educators and I think about what passion drives them, it's that ability for them to interact with the student and to actually impact their learning career, their learning journey, and know that they've had a personal touch in that. So for me, I always think, you know, what does that look like for the educator tomorrow when we see that technology makes much more of a presence for them, but they can still maintain that touch and feel that is the talent that we depend on in the education system with educators. So I was just wondering what you think about that as technology providers. How does that fit?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I've observed as I've visited higher ed institutions in different parts of the world is there are different tolerances and different appetites for online education and even for the use of technology. You know, for example, the United States, which has a pretty large history of offering distance and online education, you know, still finds that teaching staff, instructors and professors tend to have a low opinion of online education as compared to more traditional classroom environments. And when you ask them why, that's the answer. It's that they feel that the online environment is less interactive. Now, I've, as a student, attended plenty of lecture courses and modules where it was not very interactive at all, but there's something to the idea that when you're in a room face-to-face, when you're looking at others, it is a more emotive experience. You can, in fact, as we say, read the expression on people's faces, and you feel both that empathy and I think also an inspiration, a motivation to engage at that very human level. That's the sort of experience that motivates many on both the teaching side and the learning side to be engaged. And so I think that example you share where, you know, students who may have developmental disabilities or other cognitive struggles, right? Like that's so important because we're looking for any way we can to reach those particular students and help them move to the next milestone. I think in higher education, though, that situation is not foreign to us either. I think especially as universities begin to embrace a more diverse population, begin to open their doors to a wider audience of learners, educators have to be keenly aware of the very different needs and different backgrounds of those learners. And it becomes a situation where it's less about sink or swim for those students, and it's more about how do we scaffold and support and help them all be successful. And I think, you know, that interaction component is critical to that. One of the things that's really good news, I think, is, you know, no matter what happens this fall and beyond, we can take the learnings from online education and blended education and apply those to make all of our course experiences better. And by that, I mean that, you know, even though the perception of online education may be that it's less interactive, that it's more distant or isolating, we also know it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, the entire profession that's focused on designing and developing effective online modules and programs has very much embraced that challenge. How do we make these online experiences both human and engaging, as well as motivating and interactive? And so that might be something as simple as ensuring that the instructor is reaching out to students early in the course, and then having really great habits of reaching out to students en masse or individually, of creating ways for students themselves to have a community where they feel personally connected to each other. That might be through live video, that might be through asynchronous video, where people are recording their faces and voices in discussion forums. And then focusing students on the structure and the pathway through the course is critical as well, so they have that clarity and can move at their own pace, or, you know, at least understand what's coming ahead and can focus on the tasks that are really important to learning. So there's so many ramifications for considering online as that mode of instruction that don't neglect interaction. In fact, can be used to increase interaction and to enable students, you know, who may struggle on their own to learn on their own terms. That's kind of a really, you know, that's a common theme that we hear from students as we talk to them about their experience with teachers who use technology in a meaningful way. That ability to move forward on their own terms and to begin to shift from total dependency on the teacher to self-dependency and autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny because you're just talking about, you know, what the teacher needs to be mindful of and to continue in the passion of the reason that they educate to begin with, and then to be able to adapt and add those tools. When I think about the students, generally younger population, they're already there, aren't they? As far as using virtual tools, that's what they do in their daily lives with social interactions. And if you think about how we conduct our lives today with online banking, online shopping, all of the things that we do that used to be more of a face-to-face and brick and mortar place, I think that adaptation for the students is probably a little bit easier than we may think. But you know, so there's a third part of it, right? So you have the educators being able to adapt and continue that personal connection to ensure that we're still giving them the right value for their education journey. There's the students being able to adapt and work in it, and also at their own pace, which means that we may see accelerated learning in some students that we didn't expect before. And then there's a third part of, what about the technology providers? So, you know, what do you think that technology providers like ourselves need to be really mindful of so that we have that same or better outcome with the learners versus just technology for technology's sake? I think that might be a worry that some people think about.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the old adage that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should holds true in education, and especially with educational technology. And before I answer that question about the technology providers and give a little bit of our perspective at Instructure, I want to go back to that observation that you made that, you know, students today, but I think actually all of us use online and connected technology as part of our daily lives, and we use them throughout our lives. And I don't know about all of you, but for myself, having to stay at home most of the time and conduct most of my business virtually, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And yet, technology is part of our daily lives. So I think, after these campuses start to reopen, we will still see a very strong pull toward those very powerful and meaningful face-to-face experiences. Hopefully, though, we'll also see that inspiration from these experiences with remote teaching, and the conversations that many are having about how to do this effectively lead to a greater emphasis on blended and even hybrid design of modules and programs. I think blended, from what we see in the educational research, represents the best of both worlds in terms of mixing that human and face-to-face experience with the actual benefits and strengths of online technology for teaching and learning. So that's my hope there. Let me come back to that question about the technology providers, right? This is something that I think has been a secondary thought for many teachers, instructors, and administrators. We need to shift to remote teaching in a hurry. All of our students, all of our teachers will now be on these systems. What happens to those systems when you put so many students on them? And I think you'll see, or we have seen, right, varying levels of technical capability in response to this massive influx of users on the system. For us at Instructure, we've seen an increase in the number of concurrent users on the system, up 60% versus the same time last year. And concurrent simply means users who are online at immediately the same time as other users. So we went from a record high of just north of 2 million users on in a single 3-second window to well over 3. So, that's tremendous, and it shows the potential of technology to scale. But I think what a lot of institutions and users are finding, that for a lot of technology, that's kind of hit and miss. But I think this experience will set a new standard for educational technology providers, whether they're focused on education or they just simply serve education, to recognize that these influxes of users can really cause havoc on systems that are unprepared. And they'll have to set a new baseline for themselves and have that ability to scale. The other aspect of technology provisioning that needs to be considered is the human support of that technology. So at Instructure, of course, delivering the Canvas VLE to millions of students and teachers, we have our own support staff in-house. And as you see an influx of users, of course, the number of help requests and bugs reported is going to increase, and we have to be able to scale up those human support staffs to adapt to and address those issues. But one of the sort of side effects of that, the sort of third effect, I would say, on us as a technology provider, is an increased awareness of some of the common first-time user experience challenges that an educator, an instructor, or a student might experience in the technology we provide. I think when you come back to this idea that innovation in technology tends to diffuse over a bell curve, and toward the end is when the late adopters start using the technology. Oftentimes as technology providers, we tend to focus on those who are already using the technology, that majority of users who have said, yes, I will use this technology, start using it in kind of the basic ways and begin moving to more advanced ways. That's where our attention tends to be focused on any given month of the year. But with this huge influx of first-time users to the technology, I think it's been a sort of tremendous benefit for us at Instructure to be able to hear from those first-time users, to start to think in terms of their experience and their frustrations. And honestly, it has transformed our roadmap for the next few months to focus on ensuring that first-time users have a better experience, have fewer obstacles to getting from point A to point B, and greater support as they go about adopting the technology and hopefully advancing beyond the basics to greater interaction and more active learning in those online environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, we have a couple of more things that I wanted to kind of talk about as far as that human connection, because to me, I think that's vitally important that we move forward, but we don't lose sight of what we're working on. But we have a few questions. So I'm just going to go through the questions now and let's see if we can answer these in the time slot that we have here real quickly. So one of the questions was, how about those universities coming from developing countries where students lack access to internet and technology? So this is a very important question, actually, because I've been on 2 meetings just this week with in Nigeria and in South Africa, and these are absolutely areas where we need to think about how we can broaden that. So what are your thoughts about that one?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that is something that has hit us, has hit home with us. And it's not just in developing countries, it's actually everywhere around the world. It's just that the percentages will increase or decrease depending on the development level of the country. But, in the UK, there are places where students have spotty internet connection or it's not very fast. And so how do you support those students, right? It's too big of a challenge for us to tackle in a couple of minutes. But what I can say is there really is a shared responsibility here, shared between all of the stakeholders. Us as technology providers need to find more ways to make low bandwidth or no bandwidth options available to those students. Educators and designers themselves have to think about their course designs and the materials they share in terms of limited or low bandwidth, which is to say different kinds of media files or documents for students, less reliance on bandwidth heavy live video, and perhaps more emphasis on that asynchronous use of technology. And students themselves, as I say, a lot of those students have been blindsided by this crisis as well, and perhaps were ill prepared to shift immediately to remote learning. I know even for my own children, that was a challenge, right? Like, how do I begin to use technology X, Y, and Z to complete my courses before the term ends?
Right. Okay. Another question was talking about academic mobility, right? So academic mobility is one of the indicators of an institute's performance. So, when we're talking about the advantages and disadvantages of online courses from a perspective of teachers, what about the future of that aspect of the cooperation between institutes and universities in academic mobility?
Yeah, I don't actually have a lot to weigh in on with that particular question. That's an area outside of my own experience and expertise. But I certainly would say that, as students look to their own future and where they go to both, to start at university and after university, right? Institutions need to be aware that they have a lot of choices and that they have their own motivations that they will be using to guide them in those decisions. So sorry, I don't have a better answer for that particular one, but I don't want to venture an opinion where I don't have experience.
What do you think about university ranking, right? So when we think about university rankings, which is, there's lots of different methods that people use for ranking, is then there's standards. So do you think ranking, the online learning will be part of the university ranking in the future?
So I don't know that online learning or use of technology needs to per se be part of university ranking. But what I do think universities need to do is focus on continued improvement and development of curriculum design and teaching and learning methods to take advantage of existing and emerging research in the field. And when you do that and you start thinking about the importance of active learning, the importance of student participation, developing autonomy, interaction, engagement, right? Technology becomes a very, very powerful tool to address a lot of those factors. So even though I might say technology in and of itself doesn't need to be part of that ranking. Use of technology can be a great indicator that an institution and its teaching staff are taking things like active learning, cognition, affective elements seriously, and being innovative in the use of that technology to achieve those aims.
Okay, great. So we have a couple of other questions, but some of them look like I could, so let me see if I can kind of go through this. So one thing is, who takes the responsibility for the training of the teachers and students in new technologies? And, is this an active on learning, or how can we develop this required expertise? For me, I think the simple answer is it's really a responsibility of all of us in the ecosystem of the education environment. But just wanted to get your quick thoughts on that one, what you thought.
Yeah, so my opinion, and this is based on, over 10 years in university, helping staff get up to speed with technology, its strengths and weaknesses, and how it might be used in their particular courses. I very strongly believe that we must start where the educator is today, where the instructor is today, with their comfort level with technology, with their current teaching practices, and then incrementally improve. One of the great models that we have that comes out of the blended education research is that technology can be used first to enable existing teaching and learning practices in an online or technology-enabled environment, then to enhance, to find ways to improve the student and the teacher experience with technology, and eventually to transform into an experience that's entirely different from what we are used to doing with teaching and learning.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. I was just thinking, because one of the things is that that's really, near and dear to my heart, which is one of the reasons that I joined Instructure and talking about virtual learning environments, is that education, which I believe is what unlocks the world to uplift us as we move beyond, just where we are today, but where we're going tomorrow. I just have a quick 2-minute video I'd like to just end us on today for everyone to view. Now it is, obviously, a Canvas commercial video, but just take out, if you will, for a moment, the thought of it talking about Canvas, and just think about it of talking about using online learning and virtual learning in a blended environment, specifically about what this institute, Grimsby Institute, has done. And I'd like to play that with you now so everyone can see it and end on that note.
Grimsby Institute is a very, very special place. We have a very diverse cohort of students. We have around 25,000 students, 30% of whom have a learning difficulty or disability, and the areas that we serve have some very widespread disadvantage and deprivation. So it's our job really to level the playing field for them, and the use of technology that we employ to do that, I think, is quite world leading.
For Grimsby to be such a small town, we're able to give our learners the best start possible. We teach them to be bold, brave and innovative.
I have progressed so much in my confidence, in my technical skills. There are things that I would have never, ever learned.
Innovative technology comes in many different forms, and we use Canvas.
Canvas belongs to our learners and our students. It doesn't belong to the staff. The staff just build a platform to enable what the learners need.
Canvas is a comfort to me because I'm so used to working independently at home that it's really given me that place to go whenever I need help.
Canvas is brilliant because it's so accessible. For me, when I lost my eyesight, I turned to technology to assist me to get my goals, and that's what it's done.
The learners in Grimsby are fabulous. It's wonderful seeing the difference from the first day to the last day of where they've progressed. Education looks completely different now because of technology. We want our students to have an engaging, fun and exciting learning experience.
It's really opened my mind to possibilities that I could do anything.
The job is to make sure that our students' lives end very differently from the way they may have started. It's not enough to educate. It's our job to change the world through education. It isn't enough to teach a course. We have to help them not just make a living, we have to help them make a life.